The ballroom lights flare against the mirrored wall as he tells me to disappear. I stand with the flickering bulb above me, buzzing in a faint, uneven rhythm, casting broken light across the entryway and turning the polished floors into shifting slices of brightness and shadow. The present tense urgency sits heavy in my chest as I watch guests glide past in silk velvet tailored suits, their movements rehearsed and effortless, each one fitting perfectly into the kind of world that knows exactly who belongs. I taste the metallic edge of the air, a mixture of expensive perfume-polished glass and the tension of conversations that hover just above whispers. Ethan doesn't look directly at me now. Instead, he angles his body away as if shielding me from attention will keep every judgmental gaze from landing on me. The detachment in his posture sends a sharper message than any spoken warning. My reflection stutters in the mirrored wall each time the bulb trembles, slicing my outline in irregular patterns that make me look more fractured than invisible. People sweep their eyes across the room and then past me, trained by Victoria's expectations to pretend I'm little more than a misplaced shape near the edge of the crowd. My pulse presses against my throat, steady but muted, as I consider stepping back into the hall, but something rooted deeper refuses to move. Ethan's words still hang between us like static, and he knows I've heard them even if no one else has. I shift my weight, feeling the cool floor under my heels, and noticing how even the waitstaff glance at me with a familiarity born from watching me linger outside conversations I'm never invited into. The sound of clinking glasses blends with low music, forming a clean, controlled ambiance meant to elevate the family's image. I sense Victoria somewhere in the room, her presence like a cold draft you can't see but know is sliding across the back of your neck. The entire space breathes hierarchy, and the mirrored surfaces reflect versions of people that look more polished than they really are. Ethan touches the collar of his suit jacket, not quite facing me, maintaining a perfect posture meant for social photographs rather than sincerity. He whispers something I barely hear, "Stay here. Not now, just let things be smooth tonight," but the words wash over me without impact. His control depends on my compliance, and compliance is the currency this mansion respects. My breath tightens as I step 1 foot forward into the room, testing whether the world will shift its gaze even a fraction. The flickering bulb sputters again, sending a harsh pulse of white across my reflection, sharpening my silhouette for just a second before dissolving it back into the background. A pair of guests glance toward me, then at each other, then away, exchanging a silent acknowledgement that they witnessed something uncertain but chose to ignore it. I catch the faintest trace of Ethan's exhale, something strained. Something warning, but it's too soft to anchor me. The air feels colder near the mirrored wall, as if the light stored in the glass pulls heat out of anything standing too close. The more I look into the reflection, the more I see the outline of a woman who has been positioned on the perimeter of her own life. I move further into the room, my steps controlled, absorbing the sensory details that define the mansion's particular brand of elegance. My fingers graze the edge of a nearby table where a crystalline display of glasses rests, each capturing and refracting the overhead light into sharp splinters. The flickering bulb above continues its uneven pattern, almost like a warning pulse cutting across the ceiling. Ethan finally turns toward me with a softened expression, but it's the kind of soft that hides a deeper plea. He mouths something later, "Please," but even the silent effort feels like a request for me to shrink. I study the mirrored wall again and see him reflected beside me, his posture tall and composed, mine slightly tense, yet refusing to fold. A waiter pauses nearby, tray in hand, observing us without meaning to, and the stiffness in his shoulders shows he senses the quiet fracture between us. Conversations swirl around me, the music lifting in polished notes meant to smooth over tension, but still the room holds an undercurrent of expectation, the kind that shapes the air without needing to be named. Someone laughs in the distance, a sound that rings too bright, too effortless compared to the strain humming through my frame. I shift my shoulders back, aligning myself fully in the light rather than clinging to the dim border between hall and ballroom. The flickering bulb steadies for a moment before resuming its erratic glow, and in that pause, I feel a clarity settle into me, a cold edge sharpening somewhere beneath the surface. I step farther into the center space, ignoring how Ethan tenses, or how the nearest guests become acutely aware of my presence. I'm not loud. I'm not confrontational. I just exist in the full light where they're not used to seeing me. The sensation tightens inside my chest, a mixture of resolve and something that tastes like defiance. A server brushes past with a tray that glitters under the mirrored reflections, the glasses chiming softly as they pass. The sound carries an accidental elegance one I don't belong to, but will not recoil from. I sense Victoria's presence again somewhere across the room, her awareness like a cold line drawn in the air. Ethan murmurs my name once quietly, but I stay facing forward, letting the clarity of the light settle on my skin without apology. The reflection in the mirrored wall catches both of us distorted, one figure trying to hold a shape, and the other learning to step outside the frame imposed upon her. And in this moment, the truth of our dynamic becomes unbearably clear. The room is built to highlight people like him and erase women like me, but only if I allow it. My breath steadies as I refuse to step back. Then something shifts. Someone notices me. Another person turns their head, a third follows, and the pattern breaks just enough to be felt, as if my movement has disrupted the choreography of expected invisibility. I realize silence can bruise more deeply than anything spoken aloud, and I'm done carrying its marks. The music swells. The mirrored wall throws light across my face, and for one full second I stand unhidden, refusing to fold back into the edges of the room. The bulb flickers again, and every fractured reflection sharpens around me like a warning about to break. I'm Rowan Hale, 32, a litigation paralegal from Chicago, and I learned early that some rooms decide who you are before you even enter them. The past tense folds around me as I remember the first time I sensed the shape of my place in the Hale family, a place that always felt slightly misaligned with the smooth, polished world they inhabited. When I stepped into their mansion years ago, the cold doorknob at the entrance sent a faint shiver up my arm, the metal carrying a chill far sharper than the winter air behind me. I hadn't known then how fitting that sensation would become, how perfectly it captured the quiet ache of trying to belong in a space that never truly opened to me. I recall the way the foyer lights cast precise beams across the polished floor, making every movement deliberate, every breath measured. Victoria greeted me with a smile that felt beautifully carved but lacked any real warmth. Ethan stood beside her with practiced ease, fitting into the family's rhythm, while I remained slightly offbeat, still learning the choreography of their world. She asked polite questions, each one lightly dipped in scrutiny, and the entire family seemed to listen not to my answers, but to the way I shaped them, as if tone mattered more than truth. Later that evening, I touched the same cold doorknob on my way into the study, hesitating for a breath before entering a room where silence ruled like an invisible overseer. It was here that the motif seed drifted into my awareness, though I didn't yet understand its meaning. Light bends over the glass edge. I remember watching a band of sunlight slip across the corner of a glass cabinet, reflecting off the surface in a way that made the room seem to tilt, slightly distorting the edges of framed family photographs, arranged with almost ceremonial precision. The feeling was subtle, like a whisper caught in the space between thoughts, but it stayed with me. Even then, I sensed that truth in this house often traveled through reflections rather than direct sight. At dinners, I tried to follow conversations that stretched across the table like tight ropes, balanced carefully so as not to disrupt the curated image the family presented. Victoria sat at the head of the table with the composed elegance of someone accustomed to power. Ethan, ever cautious, kept his shoulders aligned with his mother's posture, mirroring her confidence while offering me occasional glances that held something like encouragement. But encouragement without action is just a softer shade of compliance, though I didn't yet see it that clearly. I recall noticing the small details, the way Lila's eyes flicked to Victoria before responding to me, the way conversations shifted when I entered the room, the slight pause before someone acknowledged my presence, as if they were adjusting their expectations before speaking. Nothing overt, nothing explicitly hostile. Just the kind of subtle exclusion that sharpens over time until it leaves a barely visible imprint on your self-worth. One afternoon, early into my marriage, the house manager, Mr. Arden, passed me in the hall with a polite nod. His presence felt quieter than the rest, like someone who had learned to see without inviting notice. The light caught his polished watch face, and the reflection glanced across the wall in a brief flare. I felt the shift again, that sensation of bent light hinting at uneven truths, but at the time I dismissed it as nothing more than the way old houses play with sunlight. Ethan, always gentle in his explanations, assured me that his family simply took time to warm up to new people. He said this with the ease of someone who had never been required to earn space in a room. I wanted to believe him, and for a while I did, but I couldn't ignore the way Victoria monitored me during gatherings, her gaze sliding over me with the clinical interest of someone assessing whether an object belonged in her curated collection. I tried to align myself with their expectations, adjusting my mannerisms to fit the quiet, sophisticated cadence of their interactions, but the more I tried, the more I felt the distance stretch. The moments that stayed with me weren't the polished dinners or the formal events, but the in-between spaces, the pauses, the glances, the slight reshaping of conversations when I entered. A kind of controlled silence loomed around me, one that communicated judgment without uttering a single word. I often caught my reflection in the mansion's many mirrored surfaces, and each time the image felt slightly altered by the lighting. The reflections were crisp, almost too clear, but they lacked warmth. I saw myself framed by opulence that didn't feel like mine, an intruder positioned carefully at the edges of a world that tolerated my presence without fully accepting it. The Hale home had an unsettling way of making me aware of my own outline, as if every polished surface were measuring whether I belonged. Even Ethan, despite his soft reassurances, seemed uneasily split between the woman he married and the family he never learned to challenge. His neutrality once felt like comfort, a calm space where I could anchor myself. Over time, though, it began to feel like a veil thin, delicate, and ultimately transparent. I think back to a small gathering where Victoria offered a toast. Her glass caught the light just as she lifted it, and the room shimmered for a moment. I noticed then how her gaze swept across everyone with practiced ownership, before landing briefly on me, an evaluation conducted in a single precise moment. That evening, after guests dispersed, I walked down the hall and noticed the doorknob to the study cold beneath my hand again, as if storing all the house's unspoken rules in its metal surface. I hesitated, wondering whether I should step into a room that didn't feel shaped for me. But I pushed through, determined to exist in spaces I wasn't invited into. I didn't know it then, but these were the small beginnings of a fracture that would eventually split open. The subtle dismissals, the bent light, the reflective distortions, they weren't random. They were warnings I had ignored, and every overlooked moment was about to connect in ways I never expected. I remember the afternoon with a clarity sharpened by hindsight, the kind of clarity that only arrives after the truth has already begun to press against the edges of your understanding. The house was quiet in that practiced, curated way the mansion always held when it prepared itself for evening events. But something in the stillness that day felt slightly off, like the air itself was holding its breath. I was walking down the east hallway, the one lined with framed black and white photographs of the Hale family across generations, each image meticulously positioned to catch the natural light pouring in through the tall windows. The glass reflection object enters here in the most natural way. A decorative cabinet with mirrored panels stood near the end of the hall, and as sunlight shifted, the reflections moved in ghost-like patterns across the opposite wall. I noticed Ethan and Victoria standing together near that cabinet, their reflections overlapping in the angled glass. The distortion made their faces look elongated and slightly blurred at the edges, like two people mid-transformation not quite themselves. I paused before they could see me, not out of fear but instinct, the kind of instinct my work as a litigation paralegal had drilled into me: observe first, engage second. Their voices were low, too soft for full comprehension, but the cadence was wrong. Victoria's tone carried her usual polished authority, crisp and measured, but Ethan's responses were clipped shorter than usual, as if he were navigating something more fragile than his mother's expectations. I leaned a fraction closer, careful not to shift the light or create a shadow on the reflective surface. Their bodies didn't angle toward each other in closeness. Instead, their posture suggested planning, quiet calculation, and the faint sensation of being assessed without standing in front of them made the back of my neck tighten. I waited until they moved away before stepping forward, letting my gaze travel to the mirrored cabinet they'd stood beside. The light caught my reflection with a precision that felt unnatural, the glass slicing my outline into sharp edges. My eyes drifted downward to the decorative bowl placed on the cabinet's surface. Something small and thin protruded from beneath the curve of the bowl. I reached for it, curiosity tightening its grip around me. It was evidence number 1, a receipt slip slightly crinkled with a faint scent of cologne clinging to its paper fibers. The printed text was sharp enough to read without effort. Ref ZL 47. Time 22:14. I stared at the timestamp, first feeling the shape of a contradiction already forming. 22. 2:14. Ethan had told me he'd been at a company dinner that night, one that supposedly ended well before 10. He had returned home wearing the same clothes he'd left, in no trace of rushed movement, no explanation that hinted at inconsistency. The receipt didn't align with the story. It wasn't dramatic or incriminating on its own, but it was wrong. Wrong in the small, precise way that often leads to truths people try to soften or hide. My heartbeat didn't spike. It deepened, settling into something quieter, something colder. Training took over, and I studied the slip further, noting the location code printed near the bottom corner, partially faded, but still legible. It wasn't the restaurant he claimed to have visited. I ran my thumb across the surface of the receipt, feeling the textured imprint of the timestamp, wondering why it was tucked beneath a decorative bowl in a hallway cabinet instead of thrown away. Evidence left behind in plain sight is never an accident. It's either carelessness or a sign that someone expected no one to look. I folded the receipt carefully and slid it into my pocket, just as I heard footsteps approaching. I stepped back from the cabinet, keeping my expression neutral as Lila rounded the corner, her phone in hand, her eyes bright with the constant performative energy she carried for her followers. She paused when she saw me, her smile polite but stretched thin. Looking for the powder room, she asked, her tone carrying a light sweetness that didn't match the sharpness in her eyes. "No," I said evenly, just taking a moment. Her gaze flicked to the cabinet behind me, then back to my face, and something unreadable settled across her expression. She continued down the hall without another word, her heels tapping in a rhythm that felt intentionally louder than necessary. When she disappeared around the turn, I exhaled, unsure whether I was relieved or more unsettled. As the house returned to its controlled hush, I walked toward the main sitting room where Ethan was adjusting his cufflink, pretending to focus on the polished surface of the window, rather than whatever thought sat heavy in his mind. I approached with even steps, my fingers brushing the receipt in my pocket as if confirming its existence. "Busy day?" I asked casually. Ethan looked up with a smile that didn't fully reach his eyes. "Just helping my mother get things organized for tonight. Simple. Light. Almost rehearsed." "I thought you had a meeting this morning," I said, as if the question held no weight beyond idle conversation. He hesitated just a second, no more, before nodding. "I did. Just a quick stop at the office before coming home." That pause, that subtle recalibration of tone and facial expression, was a kind of evidence too. Behavioral, involuntary, and familiar to me from countless witness interviews. "Everything go well?" I asked, letting my voice carry a softness that didn't match the growing tension beneath it. Ethan nodded again, adjusting his cufflink with a precision that bordered on obsession. "Smooth enough?" I tested the timeline lightly, choosing a detail he had given me before. "You got home early, didn't you?" His answer was immediate. "Around 9:30, yes." The timestamp in my pocket contradicted him in stark printed clarity. 22:14. I felt the truth bending at its edges, not breaking yet, just warping enough to catch the light differently. I offered him a small smile, not revealing anything. "Good," I said softly. "I'm glad it wasn't a late night for you." He relaxed slightly, unaware of the contradiction already blooming between us. As he stepped away to meet Victoria, I watched him noticing the small details. His steady breathing, his composed posture, the slight tension around his mouth that suggested he was holding something back. Not guilt necessarily, but something. I drifted back toward the mirrored cabinet one more time, letting my fingers hover near the glass without touching it. My reflection stared back with quiet composure, but the fractured edges in the reflection made it look like I was standing in more than one reality at once. One where I believed Ethan fully, and one where I didn't. That day marked the moment when the light first bent over the truth, when the reflections started revealing more than the words spoken aloud. I didn't know then how far that bending would go, or how many layers I would have to peel back before the truth settled into something undeniable, but the seed had planted itself. And once planted, truth never stays silent for long. The memory of that night settles into me with a strange heaviness, the past tense unfolding in long controlled breaths as I recall how the mansion transformed into a theater built on polished lies and rehearsed gestures. The air carried a faint sweetness from floral arrangements placed with military precision around the ballroom, each bouquet crafted to appear effortless, despite the hours of unseen work behind them. The charity event drew in the city's elite, their conversations floating like fragile ornaments suspended just above their heads, never touching the ground. I remember stepping into the outer corridor first, smoothing the fabric of my dress as I approached the main room. The trembling key object appears here, a small decorative key charm hanging from a crystal-encrusted display near the doorway, positioned as part of a symbolic motif for the charity's theme about unlocking opportunity. As I passed it, the key quivered lightly from the faint breeze of people moving behind me, its delicate metallic ring catching the light and glinting like a warning. The moment felt innocuous, but it set a tone of subtle instability that threaded itself through everything that followed. A swell of polished music greeted me as I entered the ballroom, blending seamlessly with the hum of conversation. People drifted between tables, the crystal chandeliers scattering light across their faces in clean, shimmering patterns. I saw Lila near the far corner, her phone angled at a flattering height as she filmed clips for her followers. Every movement calculated, her smile shifting slightly as she checked her reflection in the mirrored column beside her. She glanced at me only long enough to acknowledge my presence, before her attention returned to her screen, shaping an image of herself more polished than reality allowed. Victoria moved through the room with a kind of practiced elegance, her presence commanding without being loud. She wore a fitted silver dress that complemented the cold lighting of the room, her jewelry catching the chandelier beams and sending thin flashes across the marble floor. Her posture communicated authority, and guests responded accordingly, offering polite smiles and leaning in slightly when she spoke. Even from across the room, I could feel the gravitational pull she exerted over the social atmosphere, shaping conversations and controlling tensions with precise, subtle skill. Ethan stood beside her, matching her demeanor with a respectful attentiveness that once made me admire him, but now pressed against me with a quiet, suffocating pressure. When he saw me, his eyes flicked with something like hesitation, but he maintained his composed expression, unwilling to break the symmetry of the curated moment. I began making my way around the room, nodding politely to guests who offered thin smiles in return, the kind that conveyed acknowledgement without genuine warmth. Conversations shifted subtly when I approached, not out of rudeness, but habit, people accustomed to speaking freely only when the right audience stood before them. My presence disrupted the pattern, and I could feel the slight tightening of the air each time I stepped into a circle of conversation. It wasn't hostility, it was erasure dressed neatly in silk and etiquette. I heard laughter near the hallway that led toward the west wing of the mansion. The sound was bright, but something about it felt pointed. Following the trail of voices, I found myself stepping closer to a small knot of people gathered near the entry to the side corridor. Victoria's voice carried softly but distinctly. Her tone dipped in light amusement as she spoke to an older donor known for his generous contributions. "Well," she said, in a voice polished to delicate sharpness, "some members of the family prefer certain individuals remain, understated at events like these. It keeps things simple." Evidence number 2 arrives here embedded in that overheard line, an audible, purposeful dismissal. She wasn't whispering, she wasn't hiding it. Her tone was loud enough to reach ears that mattered soft enough to maintain plausible deniability. A few guests exchanged glances, the kind that last just a heartbeat too long and reveal more truth than words ever could. The donor chuckled politely, unsure how to respond, while a nearby server stiffened slightly, his eyes flickering toward me in the briefest instance of unintended empathy. Witness pressure accumulates in the air, thickening the tension around me as several people become aware I have heard the remark. I stood there holding my breath without meaning to, waiting for something, anything to soften the impact. Victoria turned her head slightly and saw me. Her expression shifted only microscopically, her smile freezing at the edges, but the change was enough to acknowledge the weight of what she had just done. Ethan appeared at her side within moments, as if drawn by an unseen pull. His eyes darted between us, reading the situation too late but sensing its volatility. "Rowan," he said softly, stepping closer. "We were just talking about me," I finished, my voice steady despite the sharp pulse rising beneath it. He inhaled, slightly the sound quiet but taut like the breath before something cracks. It was nothing he said too quickly, just a misunderstanding. Victoria's eyes glinted under the chandelier light, a polished calm radiating from her as she offered me a serene smile. "Everything I say is in service of this family's best interests," she said, her tone light, but her meaning weighted. "We simply hope to maintain harmony." Harmony! The word hung in the air like a blade wrapped in satin. I could feel guests watching, their gazes sliding between us with a tension that thickened the atmosphere. This was the first public scene, the one the structure demanded, but living it felt nothing like the blueprint. I became intensely aware of the mirrored surfaces around the hallway, the lights casting elongated reflections of everyone present. I saw myself there, standing in the open, exposed under the bright chandelier. My reflection clearer than ever, yet precariously fragile. Ethan stepped closer, still lowering his voice. "Please, let's not do this here," he murmured, though the fear in his eyes wasn't for me. It was for the performance unraveling at the seams. A small group behind me paused their conversation, entirely sensing the tension, as if the room had shifted its gravitational center around us. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I didn't have to. I simply refused to step back. And that refusal was enough to send a ripple through the carefully cultivated atmosphere. The trembling key charm behind me chimed under the faint shift of air, a single delicate note cutting through the moment like a signal. The ballroom's music softened as a new song began, its tempo slow and elegant. But for me, the room felt sliced into separate truths, one where I pretended not to hear what had been said, and one where the foundation beneath these interactions had begun to tilt, the truth seeping through the cracks Victoria had tried to plaster with refined smiles. I felt each gaze like a thread pulling at my composure. And when I finally stepped into the full light of the chandelier, no longer at the fringe of the room, but directly beneath its shimmering reach, I knew something had begun to shift irrevocably. Victoria had drawn her line in public, and I had crossed it simply by standing tall. The night continued, conversations folding back into their rhythms, but the fracture remained stretching quietly beneath the surface. And I carried the echo of that trembling key with me long after the event ended, knowing that whatever had begun here was only the first crack in a much larger truth. The memory of that night's aftermath still arrives in my mind with the weight of a closing door, the kind that shuts softly but carries a finality you feel down your spine. After the public moment in the ballroom, after Victoria's polished smile carved its message into the room, and Ethan's quiet pleading dissolved into the ambient hum of curated music, I slipped toward the side hallway that led to the smaller guest lounge. The noise of the event dulled behind me as I crossed the threshold, the walls absorbing the distant conversations until they felt like faint echoes drifting at the edge of thought. The lounge was dimmer than the main hall, lit by a single fixture that spread a soft glow across the bookshelves and velvet chairs. I closed the door halfway, not enough to shut out sound entirely, but enough to create a boundary between myself and the carefully orchestrated world beyond it. My breath eased, but the tension remained in my shoulders, a tight pattern that had grown more familiar with each passing month in this family. The half-open drawer object entered the scene. Naturally, it sat in the corner of the room, as part of an antique writing desk crafted from dark wood polished to a muted shine. I approached the desk without much thought, drawn by an instinct to steady myself, something mundane to ground the chaos pressing inside my chest. The drawer was slightly ajar, just enough to reveal the faint glint of a screen inside. For a moment, I hesitated, not wanting to open anything that wasn't mine. But the unevenness of the drawer tugged at me, the angled shadow beneath it, hinting that someone had been here in haste or secrecy. I pulled it open an inch more. A phone lay inside its screen, illuminated just long enough for me to catch a glimpse before fading to black. I tapped the screen and it lit again, revealing evidence number 3, a screenshot draft labeled Draft 12A, timestamped at 1803. The draft held only a few typed words before stopping abruptly as if someone had been interrupted mid-message. She shouldn't be here tonight. Keep her! Then nothing. Just a blinking cursor captured in the screenshot, preserving silence more dangerously than a completed sentence ever could. My stomach tightened. The timestamp contradicted the timeline I'd been fed earlier, the reassurance Ethan had given me before the event began. Someone had been planning something or anticipating something, and the unfinished nature of the message made it feel like the writer had been caught between intention and execution. I studied the draft carefully, noting the angular font of the timestamp, the small details that revealed authenticity rather than fabrication. I didn't know whose phone this was. No name, no identifying wallpaper, no obvious clue. But the message felt deliberately connected to the tension that had wrapped around the ballroom. I placed the phone back as I had found it, leaving the drawer only slightly open to avoid signaling that it had been disturbed. That's when Ethan walked in. The door creaked softly as he entered, his expression tight around the edges, the remnants of social composure still clinging to him, but bruised by the scene earlier. "There you are," he said quietly, brushing a hand through his hair as though trying to reset his thoughts along with his appearance. "I've been looking for you." I turned to face him, feeling the echo of the ballroom's tension lingering between us. "Did you need something?" I asked, keeping my tone steady, neither cold nor warm, just neutral enough to force him to choose the direction of the conversation. He stepped into the room, fully closing the door behind him. "I wanted to explain," he said, though the hesitation in his voice suggested he didn't yet know what the explanation should be. About earlier. My mother didn't mean... She meant exactly what she said. I interrupted softly, and so did everyone who heard it. Ethan flinched slightly, his spine straightening as he chose his next words more carefully. She's under pressure. She gets stressed, and sometimes she says things she doesn't fully think through. She fully thought that through, I said. She wanted to make a point. Publicly. Ethan pressed his lips together, searching for something to anchor himself. Rowan. This family. There are expectations, traditions, dynamics. My mother has a way she wants things to appear, and you want me to fit that appearance, I said. It wasn't a question. His gaze lowered for a fraction of a second, revealing a truth he wasn't ready to speak. Then he straightened. I want tonight to go smoothly. Smoothly. That word had become the shield he carried whenever he didn't want to confront something he feared might split the surface. His hand brushed the desk, fingers grazing the edge of the half-open drawer. I saw his eyes flicker only slightly, but enough to catch a brief, tense recognition, the drawer, the object inside it, something connected to it. His expression shuddered quickly, but I saw it. He recovered, offering a worn-out smile. Let's just go back, he said. People are starting to notice we're both gone. The problem was, they had already noticed Victoria's jab, noticed Ethan's discomfort, noticed the fracture forming like a hairline crack across something once polished. And now this drawer, this draft message, this timestamp, another crack. I didn't argue with him then. I didn't reveal what I'd seen. I simply nodded once, choosing neutrality over escalation because I needed time to understand what I was piecing together. We walked back through the hallway in silence, the distance between us feeling more like a canyon than a corridor. Ethan adjusted his cufflink again, the familiar gesture of someone trying to control what little he could. When we stepped into the ballroom once more, I felt the earlier humiliation still pulsing through the space, even as guests pretended to have forgotten. Their glances spoke louder than their politeness. I walked beside Ethan, but slightly apart, not intentionally, but in the natural consequence of his reluctance to stand too close, while eyes still measured us. As the night continued, conversations resumed, laughter rose again, and the chandelier continued to scatter immaculate light across flawless surfaces. But beneath the curated scene lay the quiet truth. Something had broken invisibly, but undeniably. And the draft message in that half-open drawer echoed in my mind with a certainty that would not fade. She shouldn't be here tonight. Keep her. The unfinished sentence felt like a doorway left ajar, the kind that led somewhere darker than anyone wanted to acknowledge. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't the only one Victoria wanted invisible. Someone else was trying to manage me, and the truth was starting to slip through the cracks. The past tense pulls tight around this memory, as if the mansion itself were holding its breath, waiting for the moment when all the small fractures I'd collected would finally begin to converge. It was the next afternoon hours before another formal dinner Victoria insisted upon hosting for a group of investors, and the house was in that tense anticipatory state, quiet but vibrating with preparation. Staff moved quietly through the halls, shifting arrangements, adjusting lighting, and polishing surfaces already gleaming under the sharp afternoon sun. I walked slowly through the corridor that connected the east wing to the central gallery, my thoughts looping through the receipt from Ref Zieloa 47, the overheard remark, the unfinished message in the half-open drawer. each detail pressed into my consciousness like a subtle bruise, persistent but not yet fully formed. The corridor itself felt colder than usual, the kind of chill that comes not from temperature but from the way light moves through a space. The walls held decorative metal sculptures, abstract shapes that twisted upward like silent frozen flames. One in particular cast jagged reflections across the wall opposite it, the uneven angles forcing the sunlight into sharp broken patterns. This is where the metallic shadow object enters the scene, an elongated silhouette thrown by the sculpture's twisted form, stretching across the wall and bending around the corner like something half alive. I paused when I reached it, not because of the art, but because the shadow distorted my reflection on the polished floor, splitting it into uneven shapes that didn't align with the way I stood. The motif echo settled into the moment. Naturally, glass splits the room into two uneven truths. The words drifted into me like a recognition, a reminder of what had been seeded earlier in the story, as if the mansion itself were speaking in reflections rather than language. Ethan appeared at the far end of the hall, moving with the measured pace of someone trying to seem calm, but revealing tension in the set of his shoulders. When he saw me, he paused, adjusting his sleeve like he needed something to do with his hands. I waited, letting the quiet stretch between us, watching how he hesitated before stepping closer, how his eyes flicked to the metallic sculpture, as though trying to predict what angle of light would fall on him.
"I was hoping to find you,"
he said, voice low, carrying an edge of caution.
"We should talk." "Then talk,"
I replied, my tone controlled but not cold. I felt too many threads pulling at me to pretend softness. "Last night, the way things happened." His words faltered, rearranging himself around the truth he wasn't ready to articulate.
"My mother didn't mean to embarrass you.
She was overwhelmed and Ethan," I said, keeping my voice steady, "your mother spoke very intentionally." He exhaled a slow breath, the kind that feels like surrender. "She's under a lot of pressure right now. The board is evaluating her. There are investors to impress, and she has a way she thinks things should look. She doesn't want disruptions." I watched his expression, carefully noticing the flicker of discomfort that crossed his eyes when he used the word disruptions.
"You think I'm a disruption?"
I asked. He didn't answer immediately.
"And sometimes silence is more revealing than a confession."
His jaw tightened, but he stepped closer, the jagged metallic shadow cutting across his chest as he moved. The light split around him in irregular shapes, distorting his face in the reflection behind him, and that's when I saw it. His hand. The one closest to the sculpture trembled, not dramatically, but with a fine, involuntary tremor that betrayed his internal tension. Evidence number 4 emerges here, the behavioral contradiction threading itself into the moment. His voice remained level, his words smooth and measured, but his body told a different story.
"I don't think you're a disruption,"
he insisted, but the tremor in his fingers contradicted him so cleanly, it felt like a crack in the foundation of the conversation. "I think the situation is complicated, and we just need to get through this weekend without any more incidents." "Without me being visible?" I said quietly. His eyes widened slightly, just enough to confirm I wasn't wrong. "That's not what I said. It's what you meant." The tension thickened between us, the metallic shadow flickering slightly as the sun shifted behind a cloud. Ethan looked away for a moment as if grounding himself, but when he looked back, his gaze held a conflict he couldn't disguise.
"Rowan,"
he said,
"you're reading too much into this. There's nothing going on."
"You hesitated," I said.
You changed details, you avoided questions, and now you say there's nothing going on while your hand is shaking."
His jaw tightened again, but the tremor intensified for a second before he curled his fingers into a fist to hide it.
"It's just stress," he said. "Everything has been a lot lately."
The way he said it didn't match the facts. And lies, even soft ones, have a particular texture that reveals itself in moments of proximity.
"What are you hiding?" I asked.
Not accusatory, just steady. He froze for a moment, the stillness stretching across the hall like a held breath. Then he stepped back, distancing himself both physically and emotionally.
"I have never hidden anything from you,"
he said carefully. Too carefully, as if choosing each word from a script.
"You're imagining connections that aren't there."
His voice stayed calm, but I've interviewed enough evasive witnesses to know when someone has rehearsed denial. Something in his expression shifted the moment I asked the question. His eyes had darted not in fear, but in calculation toward the direction of the West study where he'd been earlier that morning. He hadn't expected me to notice, but I had. The light shifted again, bending the reflections on the floor, breaking shapes apart like scattered truths, trying to reorganize themselves into a coherent image. "I'm not imagining anything I said. I'm paying attention." He swallowed hard, gaze tightening.
"Rowan, please don't turn this into something it isn't."
But it already was something. And his insistence only confirmed it. I stepped back from him, giving myself space to think. The metallic shadow crawled across the wall like a dark, abstract ripple as the sun broke through the clouds again. Somewhere in the house I could hear distant footsteps, but the corridor belonged only to the two of us. "If you know something," I said quietly, "or if you're involved in something, tell me now." There's nothing to tell. Evidence said otherwise. Tremors said otherwise. Contradictions said otherwise. And the shadow bending across his reflection said otherwise. I let the silence stretch, measuring his refusal against the growing list of fractured truths. When I finally stepped away, I didn't do it out of anger. I did it because something inside me, something steady and precise, recognized the shape of a lie evolving in real time. As I walked down the corridor, the metallic shadow elongated behind me, splitting my reflection in two. Two uneven truths. And for the first time, I realized I was no longer afraid of following either one. The memory returns with the precision of a knife's edge, each detail sharpened by repetition every time I've replayed the moment in my mind. By then, the house had settled into its evening facade, the kind of calm that isn't calm at all. Just a carefully arranged stillness meant to convince guests that nothing beneath the surface ever falters. The staff moved like shadows, silent, and practiced resetting the mansion after the previous night's tension. And I walked through it with a clarity I hadn't felt before the accumulation of evidence pushing against me from the inside, urging me toward what waited next. I had been looking for Lila not because I needed her, but because everything she did had the subtlety of someone who accidentally reveals more than she means to. Her constant recording her curated lifestyle moments, her hunger for attention that often made her careless, she was the perfect accidental witness. I found her exactly where I expected in the semi-private lounge adjacent to the West Terrace, a room bathed in soft lamplight as evening crept across the sky. She sat on a chaise near the window, scrolling through her phone with the absorbed intensity of someone watching her own reflection in digital form. As I stepped inside, the door creaked faintly, causing her to glance up. Her eyes brightened with manufactured warmth. "Rowan," she said, smiling as if we were friends. Did you need something? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I noticed how the glow from her phone illuminated her face, casting a thin, cold stripe of light across her cheek. The object for this part phone light on cheek fit so perfectly it almost felt like the room had been waiting to deliver it. She tucked her hair behind her ear, still smiling, but her fingers trembled slightly as if anticipating something. "Can I see your phone for a second?" I asked. The question startled her. A flicker of uncertainty passed through her expression, quick and subtle. Why, she asked. Did something happen? "Just let me see it." I said, my tone calm, measured. Lila hesitated for a breath too long, then finally extended the phone toward me. I took it, the cool surface pressing against my palm as I scrolled through her open apps. She didn't try to stop me, but her posture stiffened with each second. Her recent photos loaded in a grid of glossy images, Flatlay's outfit of the day shots, champagne flutes held at flattering angles, everything perfectly curated, everything designed for attention. But buried among the polished images was one that didn't match. Evidence number 5 emerged almost like it pulled itself forward, a blurred photograph captured at 03:11 a.m. labeled automatically as captured was your phone. The thumbnail alone was enough to stop my breath for an instant. I tapped it open. A hallway. The lighting dim. A figure captured mid-step, the image distorted by motion, the angles unclear, but the shape undeniably human. For one suspended second, the world stilled around me. Lila opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "It's blurry," she said, voice wobbling between defense and confusion. "I don't even remember taking that. Where was this?" I asked. Her eyes darted to the window, then back to me. I think... The West Wing. I couldn't sleep that night. I was walking around and taking aesthetic pictures. It didn't mean anything. Did you see who this was? No, she said quickly. Too quickly. I just snapped it without thinking. I deleted most of the others. But not this one. She swallowed hard. Maybe I missed it. Her gaze shifted to my face, and she seemed to realize the weight of the image she had just handed me. Something in her posture softened into uncertainty. "Is it important?" she whispered. "It might be," I replied. The figure in the photo was tall, the stride familiar, but the blur made it impossible to confirm. My thoughts reeled back to the timestamp, 3:11 a.m. That same night I had overheard a conversation years ago, the one I had kept buried, the one I pretended didn't matter because I didn't want to confront the implications. And here it was again, resurfacing in the form of a distorted figure caught on Lila's camera. The air in the lounge thickened as I stared at the image, its blurred lines bending into memories I had tried to forget. Lila shifted in her seat. "Rowan, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "Nothing you need to be afraid of," I said. "But I need you to remember exactly what happened that night. Anything you saw, anyone you crossed paths with." She shook her head quickly. "I didn't see anyone. I swear." A movement in the doorway made us both turn. Mr. Arden stepped inside quietly, his posture straight, his hands clasped behind his back. The house manager had always carried an air of quiet authority, but tonight it felt heavier, as if he knew more than he could allow himself to say. "Mrs. Hale," he said gently, "is everything all right?" "Not yet," I replied. I expected him to inquire further, but he didn't. Instead, he stepped fully into the room, his gaze flicking briefly to the photo on Lila's phone. The smallest shift in his expression told me he recognized something in it. Not the figure necessarily, but the location, the time, the context. Authority enters the scene here, not loud, not demanding, but in the calm certainty of a man who has lived in this house long enough to understand what silence costs. Lila stood up abruptly, wringing her hands. "I didn't do anything wrong," she insisted. "Tell her Mr. Arden, I wasn't sneaking around. I just couldn't sleep."
"Miss Lila,"
he said quietly. No one is suggesting wrongdoing. But the tension in the room suggested otherwise. He looked at me. May I see the photograph? I handed him the phone. He studied it with the precision of someone accustomed to details. His eyes narrowed just slightly as he traced the blurred outline. Then he exhaled. This was taken near the West Hall, he said, confirming my suspicion. Specifically, near the old study. My breath caught, though I held my expression steady. The old study was the same place where I had once heard a conversation late at night years before between Victoria and a man whose voice I didn't recognize. A conversation full of sharp whispers, the kind that feel like secrets dripping into the air. A conversation I had buried because I didn't want to pull at threads that could unravel everything. "Why were you there?" I asked softly. He hesitated, but only for a fraction of a second.
"I wasn't," he said. "The lie was gentle, but it was still a lie. Rowan Hale, the woman who never lied to herself, felt the truth knocking against the locked memories she had kept hidden." I inhaled deeply. "Mr. Arden, I need to know something." He looked at me steadily. "Yes, Mrs. Hale. That night, 3 years ago, the night of the winter fundraiser, were you near the old study?" His expression didn't change. His voice stayed even. "I do not recall." But his eyes flickered. I felt the tremor of recognition, subtle but unmistakable. Lila looked between us, uneasy. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. I didn't answer her. Instead, I felt the truth pressing forward, rising in me, like a tide that had been waiting years to break. I heard something that night. I said the words tasting like cold metal in my mouth. A conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I didn't understand it then. But now, I gestured toward the blurred photo. This is connected. Mr. Arden didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. But the silence between us changed shape, no longer empty, no longer harmless. A silence holding weight. A silence holding history. Lila's voice trembled. "Who do you think that is?" The blurred figure on the screen felt suddenly too loud, too close. My pulse deepened steady and cold. I think I said slowly that whoever it is, they were somewhere they shouldn't have been. I lifted my gaze to Mr. Arden. He held my eyes. And in that tight, suspended moment, I finally understood the truth I had buried was clawing its way back up, and the figure in that blurred photograph was the first piece of proof. Something had happened that night. Something that tied together the lies, the contradictions, the trembling shadows. And the people in this house, whether intentionally or not, had been circling around that truth for years. It wasn't just about me being invisible. It was about something they needed kept unseen. And now I had proof that visibility was shifting. The room felt smaller. The phone light faded. And the truth once blurred began taking shape. The hours after discovering the blurred photograph unfolded with attention so precise it felt measured, as if every hallway and every breath in the mansion had been calibrated to hold the truth just out of reach. The past tense wraps around this memory like a cold ribbon binding each moment in a clarity that refuses to loosen its grip. I remember stepping out of the lounge after leaving Lila and Mr. Arden behind the phone light still haunting my vision, the blurred figure imprinted like a watermark across my thoughts. The house seemed dimmer that evening, not from lack of lighting, but from something thicker anticipation mixed with dread lingering inside the air. It was nearly time for the dinner Victoria insisted on hosting for a few important corporate guests, an event she had planned with the desperation of someone trying to secure a future she felt slipping from her grasp. My heels struck softly against the floor as I made my way down the corridor that led toward the back terrace, where staff usually took brief breaks. The soft breeze leaking in from the slightly ajar terrace door carried the faint scent of lit tobacco. That was when the object for this part entered the scene: cigarette ash. It drifted from a half-burned cigarette perched on the stone railing outside the ash, collecting in a swirling pattern on the floor, as if someone had been standing there moments before flicking the cigarette in quiet contemplation. I stepped onto the terrace, letting the cooler air settle across my skin, grounding me in the reality where everything still looked composed, even though the truth beneath it was anything but. Celine was leaning against the far stone column, a thin scarf wrapped around her neck, to guard against the wind a camera case at her feet. She looked up as soon as she heard the door. Her expression softened when she saw me. She wasn't part of the family, wasn't tangled in their politics, wasn't shaped by their hierarchy. She was the closest thing I had to normalcy within these walls. "You look like you just walked through an avalanche," she said softly. "Everything okay?" "No." I answered honest, because honesty with her never felt dangerous. "I found something. Actually, a few things." I stepped beside her, my fingers grazing the cool stone of the railing as I exhaled slowly, trying to organize the storm inside me into something explainable. Celine turned toward me, studying my expression the way only someone who knows your baseline can. "Tell me," she urged. So I did. I told her about the half-open drawer, the unfinished message the receipt tucked beneath the cabinet in the hallway, the trembling shadow around Ethan when he spoke, and finally the blurred photograph with its time stamp from the hallway near the old study at 03:11 a.m. Celine didn't interrupt. She rarely did. She listened in a way that invited truth instead of questioning it. When I finished, she reached down and unzipped her camera case. I didn't understand the gesture until she pulled out the slim folder she kept for ongoing contracted shoots. "I wasn't sure if I should give you this," she said. "I found it earlier this week when I was doing a series of staff portraits for Victoria's Charity Board handbooks." She held out a cream-colored envelope with a small, faintly embossed HR symbol in the corner. My heart pressed harder against my ribs as I took it. Evidence number 6 had just found me. I opened the envelope carefully. A single sheet slid out an internal HR schedule memo labeled Ref HR 92B. The date on it caught my eye first, then the assignment column. Ethan's name appeared once under a time slot that contradicted what he had told me repeatedly about his whereabouts a week earlier. His assignment placed him at a location across the city at the exact time he'd claimed to be in meetings with his mother, but the memo clearly stated he had no required presence at the office that morning. He hadn't been there at all. The contradiction wasn't small. It was structural.
It meant that the original crack I'd felt in the narrative hadn't been imagined, it was a fault line. "Where did you find this?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "On the back counter in the administrative prep room," Celine replied. "Someone had placed a stack of folders there for the board's upcoming review. This fell out of one of them." "You're sure it was meant for the board positive?" Victoria was talking about restructuring and evaluating internal roles. She wanted the documentation polished before the investors arrived. My breath stilled a long-held pause. "You realize what this means," I said. "It's not just that Ethan lied. It means someone wanted you to believe a version of events that never existed." Celine finished for me. "And that someone had the means to control schedules, locations, and narratives." A second reversal formed inside me, the unmistakable shift of perception when truth no longer matches the one you've been handed. My mind raced through every conversation, every politely crafted explanation, every soft reassurance that had once soothed me. The shape of it twisted, revealing structure where I'd only seen coincidence. Ethan hadn't been passive. He hadn't just been avoiding conflict. He had been participating. Why would he do this? I whispered more to myself than to Celine. She stood beside me, silently letting the question hang in the night air. The breeze picked up, scattering the cigarette ash across the stone floor, the pattern breaking apart like fragmented truths dissipating into the darkness. "The family expects loyalty to its image," she finally said. Maybe he thought he was protecting something. I pressed my fingers to my forehead, the weight of realization pushing down on me. Protecting himself. Protecting them? Or protecting me from something I wasn't meant to see? Celine hesitated. Or protecting you from something you weren't meant to reveal? Her words cut deeper than she knew. Because suddenly everything connected. Victoria's comment about keeping certain individuals understated, Ethan's trembling hand, in the distorted metallic shadow, the blurred figure in the hallway at 03:11 a.m., and the forgotten schedule memo showing Ethan had reasons to be somewhere else entirely. "Someone's lying," I said. "More than one someone," Celine corrected gently. The terrace door creaked again behind us, causing both of us to turn. For a heartbeat, I feared it was Ethan. But no one stepped through. Just the wind. The house felt too quiet, as if listening. I folded the HR memo carefully and slipped it into my pocket, the paper an unnervingly sharp weight against my hip. "I need to confront him," I said. "Not tonight," Celine urged. "You're not ready, and he's not either. If I wait, he'll bury the truth deeper." "If you push now," she said softly, "he'll deny everything. And you know, denial in this family is a polished art." I exhaled sharply, the cigarette ash swirling into the air, again pulled by the breeze, as if the universe itself was urging motion. But motion in which direction? "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice tight with conflict. Celine stepped closer, her tone gentler. "I want you to be smarter than them. You have the receipts, the draft, the photo, the behavioral tremor, and now the memo. You have more truth than they ever expected you to collect. Don't waste it on a reaction." Her words settled into me like a new spine forming. She was right. Confrontation wasn't the step. Not yet. Understanding came first. And then, precision. I looked back at the house. The windows glowed warm from the interior lighting, but warmth was the last thing that belonged inside. "Something happened at 03:11 a.m., I said, "and Ethan knows exactly what. He knows more than he wants to admit. For a moment, Celine's expression shifted into something like fear. Be careful, Rowan. I'm done being careful, I whispered. I'm done being invisible. The HR memo in my pocket felt like a pulse. The cigarette ash danced at my feet like a prophecy, and inside the mansion behind those glowing windows, the second reversal completed itself, quietly revealing the truth. Ethan hadn't been trying to prevent conflict. He had been trying to control the narrative before I could discover it. And now, I was done letting him. The memory of that night never softened, never lost its edges. It sits inside me with the clarity of cut glass, the kind that reflects everything around it but still hides its own depth. After leaving the terrace with the HR memo heavy in my pocket, I walked back into the mansion knowing something fundamental had shifted. The second reversal had broken whatever illusion remained. Ethan was no longer the confused, conflicted man I kept trying to interpret. He had become a participant in something orchestrated, something deliberate, and I was done pretending I didn't see it. The mansion felt too still as I stepped through the back corridor toward the service hallway. The walls absorbed sound like a thick curtain muffling the movement of staff resetting the dining room and repositioning floral arrangements with mechanical precision. I passed the central stairwell, the chandelier above glittering with cold perfection, and turned into the north storage wing, the part of the mansion rarely used except during large events. The air there always felt a degree cooler, as if the temperature dipped slightly from lack of foot traffic. Tonight, it felt even colder. A faint unease threaded through my chest as I walked deeper into the wing. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. I had sensed this coldness before years ago on the night I overheard the conversation near the old study, the night I saw shadows moving where they shouldn't have been. I reached the small storage room at the end of the corridor, pushed the door open, and was met with the quiet scent of cedar old paperwork and a strange trace of something metallic. The overhead bulb buzzed weakly, casting a weak circle of light across the floor. That's when I saw the object for this part, the mirror shard. It lay near the far corner of the room, catching the dim light as if trying to pull it closer. The shard must have come from the broken frame leaning against the wall, a once ornate mirror that now rested in pieces. I walked toward it slowly, my footsteps quiet but deliberate. The shard reflected my silhouette in a jagged, distorted way, splitting my outline into sharp fragments. I crouched down, lifted the shard carefully by its thicker edge, and angled it toward the ceiling light. The reflection fractured again, scattering pieces of my face into asymmetrical shapes that reminded me of the way truth had been appearing to me, lately broken, misaligned, until put in the right order. I wasn't startled by the broken frame. Not anymore. The Hale mansion had a way of breaking anything that didn't fit perfectly into its curated image. But I was startled by what lay underneath the fallen frame. A piece of paper, crisp, folded once, positioned with intention rather than accident. I placed the shard down gently and pulled the paper free. Evidence number 7, an invoice slip. INV 231. The amount redacted with a thick black marker that hid the numbers, but not the implication. I studied the details with the practiced eye of someone trained to examine discrepancies. The vendor address was local. The date matched a night Ethan had claimed to be at a late strategy session. The signature at the bottom didn't match his handwriting, but the initials did. EH. Someone had tried to imitate his signature and failed. Or he had signed quickly under pressure, and someone else had blacked out the amount. Either way, deception lived inside the paper. Something purchased or paid for connected to a night he lied about. I unfolded the slip completely. Another detail emerged: the location of delivery. It wasn't the mansion. It was a private storage unit in a nearby district registered under a business subsidiary connected to Victoria's real estate holdings. Something cold slid down my spine. Why would Ethan be connected to a payment that led to a private storage unit his mother controlled? Why hide the amount? Why store something there? My breath stabilized into something steady, something that tasted like resolve. I slipped the invoice into my pocket beside the HR memo. They felt heavier together, as if each piece of evidence gained weight when paired with another. The pieces were no longer random. They were aligning. And alignment meant clarity. I stood up slowly, letting the atmosphere settle around me. The quiet in the room felt too deliberate, as if silence itself had become part of the architecture. A soft shuffle sounded behind me. When I turned, Ethan stood in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, carved into a neutrality so practiced it felt almost inhuman. For a moment, neither of us moved. The broken frame behind me, the mirror shard at my feet, the invoice slip hidden in my pocket. All of it hung between us like invisible wires pulled tight. "You shouldn't be in here," he said softly. His voice didn't match the words. He wasn't angry. He was scared. That alone confirmed more than any confession. "This is part of the house," I said. "I live here." "You know what I mean." His gaze flicked to the shattered mirror before quickly returning to me. "Rowan, please. We need to talk." "Then talk." I said the same words I had used the last time he tried to hide behind softness. "Not here," he said, voice tightening. "Somewhere private." "Privacy is where lies thrive," I said. The words landed with a sharpness that surprised even me. His jaw set. "You're letting things get out of control." Out of control, I stepped closer, closing the distance. "Your timeline contradictions. The missing messages. The draft from the drawer. The receipt. The photo. The memo. The invoice. How many versions of the truth are you planning to juggle, Ethan?" His breath hitched, small but unmistakable. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then explain it," I said. He opened his mouth, closed it again, searching for a version of the truth that wouldn't trap him, and failing. "I never wanted you involved in this," he finally said. "I was trying to keep you out." "Of what?" "It doesn't matter." "It does," I countered, "because every piece points to something happening the night of that photo. And you were there." His silence was immediate, heavy, damning. "Ethan," I whispered what happened at 03:11 a.m. His eyes finally broke. Not in confession, in fear. "Rowan," he said, stepping toward me, lowering his voice, "there are things you don't understand about this family." "Then help me understand." "You never should have started digging." "I should have started years ago." He stared at me with a mixture of grief and anger, as if he were holding two truths and forced to choose which one to drop. "You're making this harder than it has to be," he said. "Harder for who?" His silence answered for him. Harder for him. Harder for Victoria. Harder for whatever they were hiding. But not harder for me. Truth has never frightened me. Lies do. "I'm done being controlled," I said, "and I'm done being invisible."
His eyes widened slightly, not in surprise, but in the realization that he no longer had the leverage he thought he did. "This isn't the place," he said again, voice cracking. "Then tell me where the place is," I replied. "Tell me where your truth starts." He took one step forward, then another, until he stood close enough that I could see the strain in his expression, the subtle tremor in his breath. "Rowan," he whispered, "if you keep going, someone is going to get hurt." "Someone already has," I said. "Me." His face twisted with something like pain, but pain doesn't erase guilt. I stepped back. "I'm going to find out what happened, and when I do, you won't be able to hide behind silence anymore." He swallowed, but his voice was barely audible. "You won't like what you find." "I already don't like what I've found." The tension between us grew so thick it felt physical, pushing at the air until breathing required effort. Finally, Ethan stepped aside, leaving the doorway clear. "If you go through with this," he whispered, "there's no turning back." "Good," I said. "I don't want to turn back." I walked out of the storage room past him, the invoice slip burning in my pocket like a promise. As I reached the end of the corridor, I glanced back just once. Ethan still stood in the doorway, his silhouette sharp against the dim light. A man who had built his life on controlled appearances, now watching everything slip through his fingers. I didn't wait for him to speak. I didn't need to. For the first time, I understood something he didn't want me to. He wasn't the one in control anymore. I was. And whatever waited in Part 10 was no longer a truth hidden in darkness. It was a truth marching straight into the light. The night the truth broke open began with rain, the kind that arrived without warning, sweeping across the mansion grounds in slanted sheets that blurred the windows and washed the sky into a seamless dark. The past tense takes hold as I remember how the storm forced guests inside sooner than expected, funneling them from the garden paths and terrace alcoves into the main foyer in a rush of damp fabrics, bright umbrellas, and polite murmurs. The house already prepared for a small investor gathering became a hive of motion. Staff scrambled to collect dripping coats. Guests shook off water with quiet apologies, and the warm lighting struggled to counter the sudden chill the storm dragged inside. It was in this chaos that the object for the part rain-wet coat sleeve entered the scene. A man brushed past me as he handed his coat to an attendant, the sleeve soaked and clinging to his arm. Drops fell in a rhythmic path across the marble floor, each one catching the chandelier light before fracturing into smaller glimmers. The trail of rainwater stretched behind him like a distorted line, a detail I didn't yet realize would echo against the truth waiting ahead. The atmosphere inside the mansion tightened with the kind of tension that's felt before a revelation, the subtle pressure of something shifting beneath the surface. I felt it pressing through the walls, threading itself into the transitions between rooms, hiding in corners where silence waited. I walked through the main hall, slowly taking in every small discrepancy. The strained smiles, the glances exchanged between certain board members, the careful choreography Victoria attempted to re-establish despite the storm's disruption. She stood near the staircase, her silver dress gleaming under the lights, her posture poised to project control. But something about her eyes told me she felt the storm inside the house as keenly as the one outside it. Ethan entered moments later, his hair slightly damp at the ends, his expression tightly composed, his footsteps measured. We hadn't spoken since the confrontation in the storage wing.
Every movement he made now seemed deliberate, like a man standing on the edge of something he could neither fix nor escape. He scanned the room before finally meeting my eyes. A flicker guilt-fear warning passed through him, but I didn't look away. Not this time. A hush fell over the room when Victoria raised her hand for attention.
"Thank you all for braving the weather,"
she began, her voice carrying that perfect balance of grace and authority.
"We..."
A sharp electric buzz cut across the room. The wall-mounted display behind her flickered once, twice, then glowed to life with the cold shimmer of a digital feed. The crowd murmured. Victoria stiffened, turning halfway toward the screen with a look that broke her polished facade just long enough to see the fear dart through her eyes. And then the footage began to play. Evidence number 8. The final one. A live feed pulled from the mansion's internal system, but not live at all. The label at the bottom corner read, Cam Hall A timestamp 1942. The scene showed a long hallway, the one near the old study empty except for the flicker of lights reflecting off polished floors. The guests fell silent. Victoria took an involuntary step forward. Ethan froze completely. The footage then skipped. A stutter. A black frame. The timestamp jumped. 1944. 2 minutes erased. The silence in the room turned solid. People exchanged confused looks. Someone whispered,
"Is that normal?"
Another voice answered, "Cameras, don't jump like that." The feed continued playing, but the damage was done. Because the skip wasn't just a glitch. It was a signature. A gap in time intended to hide something. Something that had happened in that hallway. Something tied to the blurred photo at 03:11 a.m. Something tied to Ethan, to Victoria, to the contradictions in every piece of evidence I'd collected. I moved closer to the screen, my breath slow but deep, my mind sharpening into that steady place it goes when a truth is about to strike. "This wasn't supposed to play," Victoria said sharply, her voice cracking just slightly. The staff exchanged panicked glances. One technician rushed forward toward the control panel, hands trembling.
I didn't activate anything," he stammered. "It just appeared."
Ethan stepped forward, voice strained.
"Turn it off."
But the screen froze before they could. The frame remained fixed on the empty hallway the last visible moment before the 2-minute void. A void that felt louder than any sound in the room. I finally spoke, my voice cutting through the stunned quiet. What happened during those 2 minutes? Heads turned. People looked between me, Ethan, and Victoria. Victoria's face paled beneath her makeup. Rowan Ethan whispered, tone pleading, "Not now." Then when I asked, "When is the right time to talk about the night you've both been hiding?" A ripple of shock moved through the guests. Someone near the back whispered, "Both." Ethan stepped closer, voice low, but shaking. "This isn't the place. This is exactly the place I said. Because that hallway is the same one where Lila took a photo at 03:11 a.m. years ago. The same hallway where I overheard a conversation I never should have heard. And the same hallway connected to your missing timestamps, your false schedules, your drafted messages."
"Your trembling reactions, stop!"
he said sharply, the words snapping like a thread pulled too tight. Victoria moved toward him subtly as if to shield him, but her eyes stayed locked on me. "Rowan," she said, her tone filled with a dangerous softness. "You don't understand what you're implying." "I'm implying nothing," I replied. "I'm stating facts." I pulled the invoice from my pocket, unfolding it with deliberate calm. This was hidden behind a broken frame. INV 231. Amount redacted. Delivered to a storage unit under one of your shell properties. A gasp rose from one of the investors. Victoria's face darkened. That document is not yours to have, she said. Neither were the lies I answered. Neither was my silence. Ethan's breath hitched.
Rowan, you're misinterpreting.
Then explain it, I snapped. He froze. Completely. What happened at 1943? He didn't speak.
What happened at 03:11 a.m. 3 years ago?
He closed his eyes. Exhale, shuddering.
Where were you the night of the missing receipt?
Another silence.
Why did you tell me you were at a meeting when the HR memo says otherwise?
He opened his eyes but couldn't look at me.
And why?
I whispered,
has every truth I've uncovered led to the same hallway?
Someone near the front said.
What is she talking about?
Another voice answered.
It sounds like she has evidence.
A lot of it, someone else murmured. The storm outside pounded the windows. Inside, the storm was worse. Ethan stepped forward, finally meeting my eyes. When he spoke, it wasn't denial. It wasn't deflection. It was surrender.
You weren't supposed to find any of this.
His voice cracked.
Not because of what it means for me,
but because of what it means for you. The room tilted. Quiet became suffocating. What does it mean for me? I asked. Ethan swallowed, then glanced just once toward Victoria. She didn't nod. She didn't speak. But something in her face tightened, a warning, a plea, a threat, all wrapped into one.
Rowan,
he whispered that night. Someone went into the old study. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there.
Who?
Someone the family needed protected, he said. My pulse deepened. Ethan's jaw clenched.
You.
The room froze. Victoria inhaled sharply, color draining from her face. My mind blinked for a moment, a clean, sharp void. What Ethan stepped closer, voice breaking. You were the one in the hallway at 03:11 a.m. You were the one near the old study. The photo blurred or not, it was you. The camera gap wasn't hiding me, it was hiding you. My chest tightened. Why? Because you overheard something he said. Something dangerous. Something you weren't meant to remember. My breath caught. A memory flickered shadows, whispers of voice I didn't recognize, the metallic taste of fear I had buried deep.
We covered it up to protect you,
Ethan whispered. Not to erase you. And just like that, every truth twisted again. Every lie reformed. Every shadow sharpened. The room erupted. Gasps. Shouts. Whispers. Questions. And at the center of it, I stood frozen, staring at a truth more fractured than every reflection I had ever seen in this house. He had been hiding me. Not hiding from me. And the line between betrayal and protection had never been thinner. The moment Ethan said the words, "You were the one they were hiding," the entire room seemed to tilt as if the chandelier overhead had swung on its chain and shifted the balance of the world with it. The past tense dragged slowly through this memory because nothing about it felt fast, even though everything inside me was breaking at once. Conversations around us exploded into noise. Questions ricocheted across the polished floors. Victoria tried to quiet the crowd, but her voice could not compete with the shock she herself had helped ignite, and I stood there suspended between disbelief and a truth I hadn't asked for. The sensation in my chest was not a single emotion. It was a collision outrage crashing into confusion, fear twisting around betrayal, uncertainty scraping against the first edges of clarity. Ethan's confession echoed inside my skull, unraveling the threads of every lie I'd collected until they tangled into a truth I could barely hold. I forced myself to inhale. Then again, the air felt abrasive. "Explain." I finally said, my voice quieter than the storm outside, but sharper than anything in the room. Ethan swallowed hard. 3 years ago, after the winter fundraiser, you went looking for me. You heard voices in the old study. You walked down that hallway. I tried to remember, really remember, but all I found were fogged impressions, fragments of shadow, a cold doorknob, a whisper behind a half-open door. You overheard something you weren't supposed to hear, he continued. Something involving one of the family's partners. And when he saw you, when he realized you heard him, he panicked. It became dangerous. My pulse slowed into something heavy. Dangerous how Ethan didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked to Victoria. She looked at me with an expression that did not resemble fear. It resembled calculation unraveling. Tell her I demanded. Now. Ethan exhaled shakily. He threatened you. A chill rippled through me but did not stop there. It kept moving, spreading, digging into my bones. The storm outside hammered the windows with violent insistence, like the weather itself wanted to hear the rest. He threatened to make sure you didn't repeat what you heard Ethan said, and I acted fast. Acted how I asked. Victoria stepped forward for the first time, her lips pressed tight, her posture rigid. We erased the incident, she said, her voice carrying a tremor I had never heard from her. We cleaned the hallway footage. We removed any evidence of you being there. For your protection. You mean for the family's protection, I said. Victoria's nostrils flared. For both. My breath felt thin. What did I overhear? Ethan ran a hand over his face, looking suddenly old or worn. A deal. One involving illegal property transfers. A partner of my mother's, someone influential, someone with connections beyond this family, was threatening to expose everything unless the Hales complied with him. Victoria cut in sharply. It was a negotiation. Nothing more. Ethan shook his head. It wasn't a negotiation when he grabbed Rowan's arm in that hallway. The entire room inhaled sharply at once, and the memory slammed into me so sudden, so violent, I almost stumbled. A hand, fingers tightening, a whisper against my ear, a threat that tasted like iron. Darkness swallowing the hallway as I pulled away. No, as someone pulled me. My grip tightened on my dress. Ethan's voice softened. I got there in time, but the damage was already done. You were terrified. And when my mother arrived, she made the choice I finished. To erase me. To protect you? Ethan insisted. The partner panicked when he realized you were a witness. Getting rid of the footage was the only way to keep you off his radar. And the lies after that I asked. The inconsistencies. The shadows. The gaps. Ethan's expression twisted. We agreed to never bring it up again. To let you forget. You were shaken, confused, and you didn't remember the details clearly. So, we let the memory fade. My voice felt thin-stretched.
You mean you helped it fade?
He tried to reach for me. I stepped back.
We didn't drug you,
he said quickly.
Nothing
like that. You were just traumatized. We let time do what it always does. Distort, I whispered. Blur. Protect, he said. Hide, I countered. The storm slammed against the windows again, a violent gust that rattled the panes. Someone in the crowd tried to speak, but the moment was too heavy, too thick with the weight of years-long silence. That partner, I said. Where is he now? Victoria's mouth tightened. Handled. Meaning irrelevant, she snapped. Ethan shot her a warning look.
Rowan deserves to know.
Her jaw clenched. He's gone, she said at last.
Not by our doing, by his own recklessness. An investigation caught up with him last year. And you never told me. We wanted to keep you uninvolved, Victoria said. You were the reason the situation escalated in the first place.
Mother Ethan hissed. But her words hit me with brutal clarity. I was the reason, I repeated quietly. Victoria inhaled sharply, realizing too late she had said the one thing she couldn't unsay. I mean, your presence complicated. My presence. I stepped toward her slowly. Or my existence, she stiffened. Don't twist my... You spent years making sure I stayed small, I said, my voice shaking with a force I couldn't contain. Quiet. Out of the way. I thought it was cruelty. I thought it was control. But it wasn't just that. Ethan tried to interrupt. I didn't let him. You silenced me because you were afraid I said to Victoria. Afraid I'd remember. Afraid I'd say the wrong thing to the wrong person. Afraid I'd destroy the image you spent your life polishing. Her eyes flashed. I did what I had to do to protect this family. You did what you had to do to protect yourself. She didn't deny it. Not this time. Ethan stepped beside her, torn, fractured. Rowan, he whispered. Please. You have to understand. I was trying to keep you safe. I was trying to carry both truths at once, the truth of what happened to you and the truth of what my family needed. I was afraid if you remembered everything, you'd fall apart. I didn't fall apart, I said. I broke. Quietly. In ways none of you noticed. Because you were too busy saving a version of me that didn't exist. His breath trembled. I know. You let me believe your mother hated me for no reason, I said. You let me shrink myself in every room. You let me feel invisible. Because visibility was dangerous, he said. Because if that partner realized you remembered I wasn't invisible to protect me, I said. I was invisible to protect you. The room went silent. No more murmurs. No more whispers. Just the sound of rain drilling against the glass like a haunting metronome. You should have told me, I said, the words steady but aching. You should have trusted me with the truth. Ethan's eyes went glassy. I know. Do you? I asked. Because trust isn't silence. It's not erasure. It's not deciding my reality for me. Rowan, he whispered. I'm sorry. His apology sounded like a plea, but apologies do not rewrite history. They only illuminate it. The paper edge entered here, a stack of documents the technician had brought forward from the security office, the edge of one sheet slicing my finger as I reached for it. A tiny sting, a tiny line of blood. Proof that even the smallest truths can cut. I held on to that sting, using it to ground myself. This ends tonight, I said. No more lies, no more erasure. No more protecting me by silencing me. What are you going to do? Ethan asked. Tell the truth, I replied. All of it, to everyone who matters. And us, he whispered. What happens to us? I shook my head slowly. That depends on whether you're willing to stand beside the real me, the visible me instead of the protected one. Ethan looked like a man standing on a cliff's edge. Then he nodded. Once. A quiet surrender. Then I stand, he said. For the first time, Victoria didn't speak. Not because she agreed, because she had lost control. The power she had hoarded for years slipped through her hands as truth filled the room. And in that moment, surrounded by gasps, fragments of evidence, broken reflections, and the shadow of 3-year-old secrets, I understood something simple and devastating. The truth had always been mine to claim. They had just spent years convincing me it wasn't. The night the truth finally settled did not arrive with thunder. Not the kind that shakes windows or cracks the sky, but with a quieter, deeper kind, the type that reverberates inside the chest long after the sound itself fades. The past tense wraps this final chapter in deliberate slowness because endings that reshape entire histories never come fast. They take their time curling through memory and consequence until they land exactly where they were always meant to. The mansion had not calmed after my confrontation with Ethan and Victoria. It had only paused as if the house itself were holding its breath. Guests scattered into smaller groups, whispering, digesting, reevaluating the polished legacy they had once admired. The storm outside had softened into a steady hiss against the windows, a quieter rhythm that made the interior feel strangely insulated, as though the world beyond the Hale property had dimmed to allow this unraveling to continue uninterrupted. I stepped away from the crowd, needing airspace clarity. Ethan tried to follow, but I lifted a hand to keep him back. Not yet, I said softly. Let me breathe. He stopped understanding, or maybe just too exhausted to push. I crossed the foyer slowly, my heels tapping a rhythm across the marble floor, as though marking the tempo of a life I was finally reclaiming. My hand brushed the door frame leading into the gallery, and something inside me shifted the growing awareness that an ending was forming not out of bitterness, but out of truth aligning with itself. I moved through the hallway past the portraits, past the shimmering reflections cast by the glass fixtures lining the walls. The soft glow traced a path forward. My path. When I reached the gallery's far end, the object for this final part entered the scene a closing door. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It simply clicked shut behind me as I stepped into the quiet room, sealing me away from the world of curated deception and polite facades. The sound echoed softly final in its simplicity, like punctuation on a chapter ending after too many unwritten sentences. I stood alone for a long moment, letting silence settle around me. My breath steadied. My mind, though crowded with fractured memories and fresh truths, began to sharpen into coherence. The gallery windows framed the storm-soaked lawn outside, reflecting flashes of distant lightning that had softened into a pale glow. The world looked washed clean. I wanted that too. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my pocket and removed the pieces of evidence I had gathered, each one a small betrayal, each one a lifeline. Each one a truth waiting to be reclaimed. The receipt from Refer ZL47, the draft message captured at 1803, the HR memo, the invoice slip with the amount blacked out.
Each carried its own weight, but together they formed the shape of something undeniable. The mosaic of lies had finally arranged itself into a coherent image, and none of it had been my imagination. None of it had been hysteria. None of it had been overreaction. I turned as I heard footsteps behind the door, the soft scrape of someone breathing before they knocked. Rowan Ethan said from the other side, "Please." The fact that he didn't push the door open mattered. He was learning finally that my boundaries were not optional. "You can come in," I said, "if you're prepared to tell the entire truth. Not a curated version, not your mother's version, not the softened one you think I can handle." A pause. Then the door opened just a crack enough for his voice to reach, but not his presence. "I am," he said. "I swear." "Then come in." He stepped inside slowly, closing the door softly behind him. His eyes were tired, not from anger or resistance, but from the weight of years spent carrying conflicting truths he had never learned to reconcile. He approached me with hesitance, stopping at a distance that felt respectful rather than fearful. "Rowan," he said quietly, "I never meant to trap you in that silence." "But you did," I replied. "You all did." "I know." He looked down briefly, then raised his gaze again, meeting mine with the kind of sincerity that only comes after every lie has shattered. "You didn't remember what happened that night. Not completely. You were terrified. You were shaking. You told me you heard someone threatening the family. You kept repeating part of a sentence he said someone was going to, before you broke down. I didn't know what to do. I was 28, scared and trying to protect you from something I barely understood." I held his gaze. "So you chose erasure." "I chose safety," he said, pained. "I chose what I thought would give you peace. And I chose wrong." The stormlight flickered across his face, catching the strain in his features. For the first time, he looked like a man stripped of legacy, just a man who made mistakes and was finally standing inside their consequences. "I should have told you the truth," he said. "Years ago, before we married, before this house swallowed you whole. Why didn't you—" He exhaled a slow, fractured breath. "Because I knew it would change us, and I wasn't brave enough to risk that." And now I asked, "Are you brave enough now?" His voice broke. "I want to be." I studied him, letting the silence linger until it stretched across every wound between us. Then I said, "You can't undo the years I spent shrinking myself in these rooms. I know. You can't undo the way your mother treated me. I know that too. And you can't undo the lies." He nodded, pain settling into his features. "But I can face them with you now," he said, "if you let me." For a moment, I felt the weight of everything, the past, the years of curated invisibility, the fragments of memories sharp enough to cut the truth finally unmasked. I closed my eyes briefly. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," I said quietly. "Maybe not for a long time." "I'll wait," he whispered. "I'll earn it. All of it. Forgiveness isn't the point," I said. "Visibility is." His breath caught. "Then be visible," he said softly. "I'm here. I'm listening. I won't look away again." The storm outside eased further, shrinking into a faint drizzle. I stepped past him, slowly walking toward the door. "This house will never shrink me again," I said, "and if you want to stay in my life, neither will you." He nodded, voice raw. "I want to stay, as the man you deserve, not the one I've been." I reached for the door handle, the same closing door that had sealed me in now becoming a door I would open on my own terms.
Then start by telling the truth publicly, I said. Tell them everything. Name what happened. Name what you did. All of it.
Ethan inhaled deeply.
I will. And your mother?
I asked.
She will try to stop you.
Not anymore, he said. She lost her power the moment the truth got air. I opened the door. The hallway waited. So did the world.
Then let's begin,
I said. We stepped out together, not as the curated couple we once were, but as two people standing at the edge of truth. The gallery lights dimmed behind us. The house, once a chamber of silence, felt less suffocating. And as we walked forward, I realized something profound. I had not regained visibility. I had claimed it. And this time, no one, not a family, not a name, not a lie would take it from me again, would take it.